The first bodyguard lasted 23 days. The second lasted 11. By the time Mason Hart walked through the steel doors of the Voss Meridian headquarters, 9 trained protection officers had quit, been fired, or left in an ambulance before reaching the end of their first month. The official explanation was pressure. The private explanation was Elara Voss. She was 34 years old, worth more money than Mason could imagine, and seated alone at the end of a glass conference table while 6 people argued about whether he was qualified to stand between her and a bullet. Rain moved down the windows behind her in long gray lines. Seattle had been dark since breakfast. The room smelled of coffee, wet wool, and the clean electric heat of expensive equipment. If this story already has you wondering, who engineered those failures? Tap like and tell me where you're listening from. Mason did not look at the people discussing him. He looked at the exits. There were 4. 2 obvious, 1 concealed behind a wall panel, and 1 service door whose lock plate had been installed backward. A camera above the west window was angled 3 degrees too high, leaving a narrow blind strip near the ceiling access ladder. The table had no floor anchor. The glass wall behind Elara was laminated but not rated for the kind of threat listed in the briefing. Someone had placed a decorative bronze sculpture directly in the path between her chair and the nearest secure corridor. He counted all of that before the head of corporate security finished saying his name. Mason Hart, Donovan Rusk said, reading from the file as if the words offended him. 37. Former King County Sheriff's Deputy. 8 years in protective services and emergency response. 2 years running. Independent security assessments. No military special operations background. No federal protection detail. No executive protection certification newer than 18 months. Mason waited. Rusk looked up. You understand the concern? I understand you invited me here after 9 people failed, Mason said. So whatever qualifications they had, those didn't solve the problem. The general counsel coughed into her hand. The chief financial officer looked at the table. Elara Voss did not move. Up close, she looked less like the magazine profiles and more like the person who had survived them. Dark hair cut just below her jaw, black jacket over a white silk shirt. No jewelry except a narrow silver watch. Her face was controlled in the way some buildings were controlled. Every entrance monitored. Every window reinforced. No visible place to stand without permission. You think you can solve the problem? She asked. Her voice was quiet, which meant everyone else leaned toward it. No, Mason said. That changed the room. Russ's mouth tightened. The CFO actually looked relieved, perhaps because one candidate had finally understood the obvious. Elara's eyes sharpened. Then why are you here? Because I think you're asking the wrong question. She folded her hands. Which question should I ask? Why 9 capable people were put into the same system and produced the same result? The rain ticked against the glass. Elara turned slightly toward Rusk. And what does Mr. Hart believe the system is? Mason answered before Rusk could. I don't know yet. I've been in the building 4 minutes. A small sound came from the legal counsel, almost a laugh. She buried it. Elara's expression did not soften. My last bodyguard believed confidence was part of the service. Confidence without information is decoration. What do you believe the service is? Getting you home. Keeping everyone else alive while I do it. Telling you no when your decision makes that harder. That final sentence settled over the table like dust after impact. Elara Voss had built a freight routing company from a graduate school project and turned it into the nervous system behind thousands of warehouses, ports, and autonomous delivery corridors. She did not enjoy being told no. People around her had learned to shake disagreement into softer words. Mason could see it in the way Rusk's jaw tightened and the CFO's eyes dropped. Elara studied him for a full 10 seconds. You have a daughter? I do. 8 years old. Yes. Your wife died 3 years ago. Mason kept his face still. 2 years and 9 months. Would your daughter approve of you accepting a position where the previous employee was hospitalized? It was a cruel question, not because she lacked the right to ask it, but because she had selected the wound and pressed it publicly to see what moved. Mason looked at her. Not away. My daughter would approve of me doing honest work. She would not approve of me pretending danger disappears because I have responsibilities. And if your responsibilities become collateral, then I plan better. Russ closed the folder. This is pointless. Elara lifted one finger, and he stopped. What happened to the ninth guard? Mason asked. Russ's expression hardened. Vehicle collision during a route change. Who ordered the route change? Ms. Voss? Why? Elara answered. Because I believed we were being followed. Were you No. Who determined that? Security review. Conducted by... Rusk leaned forward. You are interviewing for a position, Mr. Hart. You are not conducting an investigation. Mason looked at the glass wall, the blind strip above the camera, and the service door with the backward plate. Maybe that's why you keep hiring people instead of fixing anything. The interview ended 4 minutes later. Russ told him someone would be in touch. The CFO gathered his papers. The legal counsel gave Mason a quick, unreadable glance as she left. Elara remained at the table. Mason had reached the outer hallway when her voice stopped him. Mr. Hart. He turned. She sat exactly as before, framed by rain and city light. You begin Monday. 30-day provisional contract. If you last. Russ stared at her. Mason did not. What happened to the first guard? He asked. Elara's mouth became a straight line. He abandoned his post during an active threat. Mason nodded once. Then Monday starts before Monday. He crossed to the service door, removed the multi-tool from his coat, and tightened the backward lock plate while the room watched. That was how it began. Not with trust, not even with respect. With a loose screw and a woman who had stopped believing anyone stayed when staying became expensive. Mason's apartment sat above a bakery in West Seattle, close enough to the water that salt gathered on the window frames, and gulls screamed from the roof before sunrise. Piper was awake when he got home, knees tucked beneath a blanket on the couch, a math worksheet spread over her lap, and a half-eaten cinnamon roll on a plate beside her. You got the scary lady job, she said without looking up. Mason set his keys on the counter. How do you know she's scary? Grandma said the company people called twice and sounded frightened. His mother, June, stood at the little stove stirring soup and trying not to smile. I said serious, she translated. Piper looked up then. She had Mason's brown eyes and her mother, Naomi's stubborn chin. Her hair was tied in 2 uneven braids because she had recently declared herself old enough to reject assistance, and not yet old enough to produce symmetry. Around her neck hung a red cord attached to a tiny brass compass. Naomi had given it to Mason before Piper was born. The engraving on the back was worn but readable. Find the way home. After Naomi died from a sudden cerebral hemorrhage, Piper began borrowing the compass on difficult days, school presentations, doctor visits. The first sleepover she almost attended. Tonight it rested against her pajama shirt. Is the job dangerous? She asked. Yes. June stopped stirring. Mason sat beside his daughter. He did not tell Piper lies simply because adults preferred the sound of them. He also did not hand a child every sharp edge of the world. The woman I'll protect has received threats, he said. Most threats are made by people who want fear more than harm. My job is to know the difference and prepare for both. Do you have to tackle anybody? Hopefully not. Can you tackle people? Hopefully. Piper considered that. Mom said the compass only works if you tell the truth about where you are. Mason looked at the little brass face. She did. So, where are you? Tired. That is not a place. June carried the soup to the table. It is after 35. Mason smiled despite himself. Piper did not. Where are you? She repeated. He understood the question then. Children sometimes ask the cleanest version of what adults spent years avoiding. I'm at the beginning of something, he said. Piper nodded, as if that were acceptable. Then she removed the compass and held it out. Take it Monday. It's yours tonight. You need it more. He closed her fingers around it. I know the way home. She watched him with the solemn suspicion of someone not fully convinced. Monday arrived under cold rain and corporate resistance. Mason reported to Voss Meridian at 5:40 in the morning, 20 minutes before the official time Rusk had given him. The lobby guard claimed his access card had not been activated. Mason waited 3 minutes, borrowed a visitor badge, and entered through the screening station, while the lobby guard called upstairs in a panic. The first test, he decided, had either begun already or the company was naturally incompetent. Neither possibility comforted him. At 6:05, he found Elara in a secure elevator moving toward the underground garage without him. The doors began to close. Mason stepped through at the last second. She did not look surprised. "You're late. I was early. My credentials were disabled." "Then you failed to anticipate disabled credentials. Did you disable them?" She looked at the floor indicator. "Does it matter?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because testing the guard and interfering with the guard are different. One tells you whether I can do the job. The other helps a threat do theirs." The elevator descended. "You are very comfortable correcting your employer," she said. "I'm comfortable being unemployed. It makes some conversations easier." For one instant, he thought she might smile. Instead, she said, "My vehicle departs in 90 seconds. The armored SUV waited in the garage with a driver named Luis and a second protection officer assigned by Rusk. The officer introduced himself as Brent Kessler, a former private military contractor, broad enough to make doorways seem poorly designed. He looked at Mason's ordinary coat and compact equipment bag with visible disappointment. "Rusk says you're provisional," Kessler said. "Everyone is," Mason answered. Elara entered the rear seat. Kessler moved to follow. Mason held up a hand. "Check the vehicle first." "Checked it 4, then check it at 6. Kessler laughed once. "You want to crawl underneath in the rain? Go ahead." Mason crouched beside the rear wheel. Luis watched from the driver's door. The vehicle looked clean, until Mason ran his light along the undercarriage and saw a thin black disc fixed behind the rear. "Suspension brace." He did not touch it. "Everyone out of the garage," he said. Kessler's amusement vanished. Elara remained inside. Mason opened her door. "Out." "What is it?" "Unknown device." "Move." She held his gaze, testing whether the command could be negotiated. It could not. Something in his face convinced her. She transferred to a waiting executive sedan while building security cleared the area. The device turned out to be a commercial GPS tracker, not an explosive. Cheap, common, recently placed. Rusk arrived furious. "Maintenance tag," he said, before the bomb technician had finished photographing it. "Fleet uses those for diagnostics." Luis shook his head. "Not ours." Rusk ignored him. "We are already behind schedule." "Mass." On looked at the tracker, who had overnight access to the garage. "We'll review logs. Review them before the car moves." Elara sat in a second vehicle with the door open, listening. "We leave in 3 minutes," she said. Mason turned. "No." Kessler made a sound under his breath. Elara's eyes chilled. "The Port Authority meeting cannot be moved. The person who placed that knows your primary route, vehicle, garage, and departure window. Until we establish whether the tracker was meant to follow you or measure our response, you don't use a scheduled route. I have used scheduled routes for 12 years, and 9 bodyguards didn't last a month." The sentence landed hard enough that Luis looked away. Elara's face became perfectly still. "Find another route," Mason did. They changed vehicles twice, exited through a delivery dock on the north side, used an employee shuttle for 6 blocks, and transferred to a contractor van near Pioneer Square. Kessler complained until Elara told him to stop speaking. They arrived at the Port Authority meeting 4 minutes late and alive. That should have earned Mason space. Instead, it earned scrutiny. The tracker had no usable prints. The garage log showed no unauthorized entry. The camera covering the vehicle bay had lost 12 minutes of footage during a software update. Russ presented these facts like an argument for moving on. Mason heard them as proof that the problem lived inside the system. By the 3rd day, he understood why the guards quit. Elara rejected route discipline when it interfered with work. She changed appointments without telling the protection team. She refused to use the secure office during threats. because she believed hiding rewarded the sender. She tested guards with false emergencies, sudden exits, swapped vehicles, and deliberately incomplete information. If one raised his voice, she dismissed him. If one touched her without warning, she dismissed him. If one allowed a threat to alter her schedule too easily, she dismissed him. She insisted the rules apply to everyone except herself, then despised anyone weak enough to permit it. Mason did not indulge her. On Thursday, she left a bored dinner through the kitchen instead of the planned rear corridor. He intercepted her beside the dishwashers. "You altered the exit," he said. "I wanted air. You wanted to see whether I noticed. And did you?" "Yes, get back inside." "You don't command me." "Correct. I command the movement while I'm responsible for it. You can fire me after we're secure." The kitchen staff became intensely interested in silverware. Elara's eyes flashed. "My lost god grabbed my arm. I'm not grabbing you. I'm giving you a choice. Planned exit or no exit." For a moment, neither moved. Then she turned and went back through the corridor. She did not fire him. On Friday, she sent him to inspect a meeting room while she entered a second elevator alone. He anticipated it, positioned Luis on the lower floor, and met her when the doors opened. "This is childish," he said. "Then why are you breathing hard?" "Because I took the stairs? I thought you were former law enforcement." "I am also 37. That time the smile happened, brief and unwilling, but real. The first week ended without an attack, which meant nothing. Threat environments were made of long, quiet stretches and one bad minute. Mason spent the weekend reviewing every prior incident report he could obtain. The first guard had abandoned the estate after an alarm indicated an intruder in the east wing. The intruder was never found. The second guard was fired for restraining Elara during a smoke event that turned out to be a faulty sensor. The third quit after a vehicle brake failure on a mountain road. The fourth suffered a broken wrist in a stairwell collision with an unidentified delivery worker. The fifth was accused of leaking a hotel location. The sixth had a panic episode after receiving photographs of his children at school. These events disappeared from the industry. The eighth resigned after Elara's private medical file appeared anonymously in his email. The ninth, the route change collision, remained in physical rehabilitation. Different incidents, same effect, isolation. Mason laid the files across his kitchen table Sunday night, while Piper built a cardboard lighthouse on the floor. June sat opposite him, with reading glasses low on her nose. "They're not trying to kill her," she said after an hour. Mason looked up. "They're teaching her. No one is safe near her," June continued. "That way she does the job herself, for them." Piper pressed yellow paper windows onto the lighthouse. "Who is them?" June froze. Mason had learned there was no useful way to pretend children had not heard what they had clearly heard. "That's what I'm trying to find out." Piper held up the brass compass, which she had attached temporarily to the lighthouse roof. "Maybe she keeps making people leave because leaving first hurts less." June stared at her granddaughter. "Where did you learn that?" Piper shrugged. "School." Mason knew it had not been school. After Naomi died, Piper had stopped asking other children to play for almost a year. She would sit near them, close enough to hear, far enough not to be rejected. Mason had watched grief disguise itself as independence in a child too small to name either one. He looked again at the files. Every incident did more than remove a guard. It confirmed Elara's belief that closeness created leverage and responsibility created targets. Monday morning, he asked her one question before the vehicle left the estate. "Who benefits if you become impossible to protect?" Elara did not look away from a tablet. "You have been employed 7 days. That isn't an answer. No, it's a reminder that familiarity is not authority. Then consider it a professional question." She closed the tablet. "My competitors benefit. People who want me to sell. Board members who think risk becomes smaller if the woman carrying it disappears. Former partners. Disappointed investors. Men who dislike being told their ideas are obsolete. Choose a line. Who benefits most?" Her gaze moved to the rain-streaked window. "Donovan Rusk says threats are rarely that simple." "I didn't ask Donovan Rusk." Something closed behind her face. Get in the car, Mr. Hart. He did, but he carried the answer with him. Not what she had said, what she had avoided. The second week began with a package no one remembered accepting. It sat on Elara's desk before 7 in the morning, wrapped in brown paper and tied with ordinary white string. No return address, no delivery scan, no entry in the loading log. Mason found it because he had started arriving before the cleaning crew left, and because he had learned that objects in protected spaces mattered most when they looked as though they belonged. He evacuated the office floor, brought in the bomb unit, and watched Elara conduct a video conference from the secure operations room, while technicians dismantled the package 30 feet away. Inside was a black dress shoe, polished to a mirror shine. Size 11. Men's. A strip of white ribbon had been knotted around it, and tucked beneath the tongue was a card with 5 words printed in block letters. Everyone walks away from you. Elara read the photograph of the contents without visible reaction. Meaningless theater, she said. Who wore size 11 at your wedding? Mason asked. Her gaze lifted slowly. Rusk, standing at the far side of the secure room, cut in. We're not turning a prank into a psychological profile. Mason ignored him. Former fiancé, brother, father. Elara placed the photograph face down. Preston wore 11. Preston who? Preston Cade, former chief operating officer, former fiancé, current owner of a large grievance, and several excellent attorneys. Mason had seen the name in company history. Preston Cade had helped turn Voss Meridian from a logistics algorithm into a global platform. 18 months earlier, he had resigned after a private disagreement, sold most of his holdings, and disappeared from public view. The company statement described the departure as strategic. Strategic was a word corporations used when the truth had lawyers. Why did he leave? Mason asked. Because I ended our engagement and blocked the acquisition he wanted. In that order. Elara's eyes cooled. Does the sequence improve your protection plan? It changes motive. Rusk stepped closer. Cade was investigated after the first threat. No link. By your team. Yes. Then I'd like the raw file. You'll receive the summary? I asked for the raw file. You don't have clearance. Elara looked between them. The tension was not new. Mason had felt it since the first interview. Rusk did not behave like a security chief whose client was in danger. He behaved like the owner of a system someone else had entered without permission. Give him the file, Elara said. Rusk's jaw tightened. There are internal sources. Redact employee names. Give him the file. For the first time, Mason saw something like fear move through Rusk's eyes. It disappeared quickly, but not quickly enough. The raw file arrived 6 hours later and had been sanitized so aggressively that it was almost decorative. Interview transcripts summarized instead of quoted, visitor logs without timestamps, expense records grouped by quarter. Mason read every page anyway. Preston Cade had motive, but the investigation had focused on whether he personally sent threats. It had not examined whether someone inside the company benefited from making him the obvious suspect. The shoe package changed procedures. Mason moved Elara's primary workspace to a smaller interior office for 2 days while the main floor was swept. He instituted sealed delivery bins, dual signature package handling, and random credential checks. Elara complied with visible irritation. On the second afternoon, she appeared at the door of the interior office and said, "This room has no windows. That is one of its strengths. It feels like punishment. It's temporary. The threats have been temporary for 14 months. Mason stopped reviewing the access chart. Is that why you test every guard? I test every system. That's not what I asked. She looked past him at the blank wall. The first man assigned to me said he would not leave the east corridor under any circumstances. An alarm sounded in the guest wing. He left the east corridor in under 40 seconds because he believed there was an intruder. There wasn't. He made a tactical decision based on incomplete information. He broke his word. Mason leaned back in the chair. Those aren't always the same thing. They are when the word is the service. There it was again. Not anger at error. Anger at departure. Did you trigger the alarm? he asked. Elara's silence answered. You staged the first incident. I needed to know whether he would stay at the assigned point. And when he moved to protect the rest of the house, you called it abandonment. He left me alone. The words came out before she could sharpen them. The room changed. Mason did not fill the silence with sympathy. He had learned that pity made Elara feel observed, rather than understood. What happened while he was gone? He asked. Nothing. Then why does it still matter? Her expression closed. We are done. She turned toward the hall. Elara. It was the first time he used her name. She stopped. If you make people choose between protecting you and obeying an artificial rule, eventually you'll prove whatever you were afraid of proving. She did not turn around. You have been here 12 days, Mr. Hart. I know. No one has crossed 29. I know that too. She left. That evening, Mason found a handwritten change on the next day's schedule. The windowless office had been removed. The morning meeting would take place in the secure conference, SUIT, with reinforced exterior glass. It was not agreement. Exactly. It was movement. The next threat came through a person, rather than a package. A junior engineer named Simone Bell arrived at a product review with a ceramic mug, a tablet, and a visitor badge that displayed someone else's photograph. The lobby system had issued a duplicate credential after her. Original badge failed. She had passed 2 checkpoints because the printed name was correct, and everyone assumed the image error belonged to software. Mason stopped her outside the conference room. That isn't you, he said, pointing at the badge. Simone looked down and went pale. They printed it 5 minutes ago. Who was the photograph? I don't know. The image showed a man in his 40s with close-cropped gray hair. Mason had seen him before, not in person. In the incident file attached to the 4th guard's stairwell injury. The unidentified delivery worker. He moved Simone into an interview room, locked down the floor, and sent the badge image to legal. The credential printer logs showed the photo had been attached to an inactive contractor profile. The contractor, Owen Vale, had worked for Voss Meridian's facilities vendor 3 years earlier and died of cardiac failure 16 months ago. Dead men did not enter secure buildings. Their credentials did. Russ called it a database corruption event. Mason called it a message. Elara called both of them into her office and asked one question. Can the system be trusted? Russ answered first. Yes, the anomaly is contained. Mason said no. Russ turned on him. You do not understand the architecture. I understand the dead contractor's profile was used to manufacture an active badge inside your secure lobby. That doesn't mean the core platform is compromised. It means someone can produce access that looks legitimate to the people paid to stop it. Elara looked at Rusk. How long to rebuild credential control? Rebuild is unnecessary. How long? He hesitated. 2 weeks for full revalidation. Yeah, 48 hours. That is not operationally responsible. Neither is telling me a dead man at my door is a printer error. Rusk left with the rigid silence of someone storing resentment for later. Mason remained. You recognized the photograph? Elara said. It was in the 4th incident report. You read all of them. I'm paid to understand the pattern. And what is the pattern? Someone is using your own protection system to create controlled failures. Why? To remove people, frighten others, build a story that you are unstable, unmanageable, or cursed. Her mouth tightened at the final word. Do you believe in curses, Mr. Hart? No. What do you believe in? Access, incentive, repetition, and loyalty. He thought before answering. I believe loyalty is what remains after convenience leaves. She watched him carefully. That sounds rehearsed. It cost me too much to rehearse. He left before she could ask what he meant. The school called the next Tuesday at 2:17. Piper had a fever. June was across town for a dental procedure, and Mason's backup caregiver had a sick child of her own. He stood in the operations room with Elara's afternoon route on. One screen and the school nurse's number on his phone. I need coverage for 45 minutes, he told Kessler. Kessler shook his head. Rusk moved me to credential audit. Mason called Rusk. No answer. He called the reserve officer. Voicemail. He called the transport lead, assigned offsite. The arrangement was too neat. Elara entered before he decided whether to cancel her investor meeting. What happened? My daughter is ill. Go. I don't have relief. I said go. You have movement in 30 minutes. Move it. It's a confidential investor visit. We've already changed twice. Elara looked at the schedule, then at him. Bring her here. Mason almost laughed because the suggestion sounded absurd in the middle of a live threat environment. This is not a daycare. No, it is a building with medical staff, secure access, and 16 empty offices. Bring her here or cancel the investor visit. Those are the options. He collected Piper under a sky the color of wet cement. Her fever was low, more fatigue than illness. But school policy was school policy. She climbed into his car with her backpack and the brass compass looped around one wrist. Am I in trouble? She asked. No. Are you? Possibly. Is this the scary lady's building? Her name is Elara. That means yes? Piper met Elara in a private conference room on the 26th floor. Mason expected stiffness. Elara had negotiated hostile takeovers with less visible caution than she showed, approaching a tired 8-year-old curled under a company fleece blanket. Piper, Mason said, this is Ms. Voss. Piper studied her. Dad says your name is Elara? He is correct. He also says scary is not precise. Mason closed his eyes. Elara looked at him, then back at Piper. What word did he recommend? He didn't. He changed the subject. A faint line appeared beside Elara's mouth. That sounds like him. Piper noticed the narrow scar along Elara's left temple, a pale line usually hidden by hair. Children noticed physical truth without the adult performance of not noticing. Did a bad person do that? Piper asked. Mason stepped in. You don't ask people about scars. It's all right, Elara said. Her fingers moved once near the scar, then stopped. A bad decision did it. Yours. No. Piper accepted that answer. She pulled the brass compass from her wrist and placed it on the table between them. This is for when you don't know where home is. Elara looked at the compass but did not touch it. Do you often forget? After my mom died, yes. The directness of it made the room feel suddenly smaller. Mason waited for Elara to redirect, retreat, or turn the moment into something manageable. Instead, she sat across from Piper. What helped you remember? She asked. Dad came back every time he said he would. Elara's eyes lifted to Mason. Piper went on, unaware or unwilling to notice the tension. Sometimes late, but late is not gone. Mason swallowed. Elara looked down at the compass again. Your father has a complicated job. He says complicated is often just several simple things hiding together. That also sounds like him. Piper pushed the compass across the table. You can borrow it. I can't take this. You're not taking it. Borrowing has a return part. Elara's hand moved slowly. She picked up the compass by the red cord. The brass caught the gray light from the windows. What does it say? She asked. Find the way home. Elara turned it over and read the engraving herself. For a moment, the controlled executive disappeared, and a tired woman sat in her place, holding proof that someone had once believed return was possible. I'll keep it safe, she said. Piper nodded. Dad will make you. The investor meeting began 20 minutes later. Piper remained in the secure room with soup, a tablet, and a company nurse checking her temperature. Mason took his position outside Elara's conference space. During a pause between sessions, he saw Elara touch the compass through the pocket of her jacket as if confirming it was still there. That evening, Piper's fever disappeared as mysteriously as it had arrived. She fell asleep in the car before they reached the bridge. Mason carried her upstairs, tucked her into bed, and found a message from Elara on his phone. The compass will be returned tomorrow. He typed, no urgency. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, your daughter says borrowing has a return part. Mason looked toward Piper's room. He replied, she's strict about contracts. The answer came almost immediately. So am I. The next morning, the compass was not returned. It sat on Elara's desk beside her phone. red cord coiled neatly around the brass face. Neither of them mentioned it. By day 21, Mason had outlasted 6 of the previous guards. The company began to notice. Employees who had once spoken to him as temporary equipment started using his name. Luis brought him coffee without asking. Lenora Pike, the general counsel, who had almost laughed during the interview, began forwarding him anomalies before Rusk could summarize them away. Even Kessler stopped making jokes about his coat. Elara noticed too. "You're becoming popular," she said one morning, as they crossed the secure garage. "That seems unlikely. People trust consistency. It is their least imaginative weakness, or their most useful strength. Trust makes people careless. Fear does too." She stopped beside the vehicle. "You enjoy disagreeing with me?" "No, I enjoy useful disagreement. You happen to provide a lot of material." She looked at him for a long second. Day 21. "I know. The record is 29. You keep track. I keep track of everything." He opened the rear door. "That isn't the same as understanding it." She entered without answering. The first real attack happened on day 24. It began with a fire alarm at the Lake Union Research Annex during a closed demonstration of Voss Meridian's new autonomous freight coordination platform. The alarm sounded at 11:08. Building systems showed smoke on the 3rd floor. Staff began moving toward the main stairwells. Rusk's command center ordered an immediate evacuation to the East Loading Court. Mason heard the instruction in his earpiece and looked at the live building plan on his tablet. The East Loading Court camera had gone dark 9 seconds earlier. He grabbed Elara's elbow only long enough to stop her movement, then released. "Not east. The command says east. The camera is down. Fire is west," which is exactly why east is predictable. Kessler appeared at the corridor junction. Rusk confirmed route. Mason smelled something then. Not smoke. Solvent. Sharp and chemical, drifting from the ceiling vent above the east hall. He looked at Elara. "Service lab now?" She did not argue. They moved through the south equipment corridor, while employees streamed the opposite direction. Mason placed Kessler behind Elara, Luis ahead. At the lab door, the electronic lock rejected Elara's credential. Mason used the mechanical override key he had insisted on carrying. The door opened. Inside, a technician screamed. A man in a gray maintenance jacket stood beside the emergency exit, with a compact pistol pointed toward the floor. He had not expected anyone to enter from the interior corridor. For one fraction of a second, everyone froze. Then the man lifted the weapon. Mason moved Elara behind a steel equipment cart and drove the cart forward at an angle. The first shot struck metal. Kessler pulled the fire door closed between the attacker and the corridor while Luis triggered the silent alarm. The second shot broke a glass cabinet. Mason reached the technician, dragged her behind the barrier, and heard the attacker run through the exterior exit. The entire exchange lasted less than 6 seconds. No one was hit. Outside, police found the maintenance jacket in an alley and the weapon abandoned beneath a stair landing. The fire alarm had been triggered manually. The smoke sensor report was false. The East Loading Court contained a parked van with stolen plates, plastic restraints, and a portable signal jammer. This had not been theater. Someone had planned to take Elara alive. At the hospital, after the technician's cuts were treated and Kessler's shoulder examined, Elara sat in a private room with the brass compass clenched in one hand. Mason stood near the door while detectives moved in and out. His pulse had returned to normal. His hands had not. Elara looked at him. "You disobeyed command?" "Yes. If the West Corridor had been the trap, it wasn't." "You could not know that." "I knew the approved exit lost visual coverage before the alarm. I knew the chemical smell didn't match a structural fire. I knew someone wanted the whole building to move in one direction." She looked down at the compass. "Kessler said you used yourself as the first barrier." "I used the card." "He said you moved before it?" Mason said nothing. Her voice changed, not softer but less offended. "Why?" "Because you were behind me. That is not an explanation. It's the job. No, her gaze held his. The job is planning distance. Procedure. Donovan says personal instinct creates unnecessary exposure. Donovan's approved route led to a kidnapping van. The word sat between them. Elara looked toward the closed door. Do you think he knew? I think someone with command access built that route. And if it was him, then every guard before me was placed inside a system designed to fail. Her fingers tightened around the compass until the red cord cut into her skin. And you? She asked. Mason thought of Piper asleep, with one hand under her cheek. He thought of Naomi's voice, saying that courage was not the absence of fear but the refusal to let fear choose alone. He thought of the 9 files and the message in the shoe. I'm still here, he said. Elara closed her eyes for one brief second. Day 24 ended with police outside the hospital, press bands around the building, and the first undeniable proof that the danger was not imagined. Day 25 began with Donovan Rusk recommending Mason's immediate suspension for failure to follow command. The suspension recommendation arrived at 6:12 in the morning in a 12-page memorandum with 3 signatures, 4 policy citations, and no mention of the kidnapping van. Mason read it in the hospital cafeteria while drinking coffee that tasted faintly of burned plastic. Rusk accused him of abandoning command structure, improvising movement without authorization, escalating danger to the principal, and using an employee as an unapproved physical shield, which was an inventive description of rolling a steel equipment cart toward a gunman. Lenora Pike sat across from him with the document open on her tablet. He wants you off the premises before the police finish interviewing the command center. He wants control of the story. He has control of the access records. That's more useful. Lenora studied him. She was in her late 40s, precise without being brittle, and had the expression of someone who had spent 20 years watching wealthy people turn consequences into vocabulary. You suspected him before yesterday. I suspected the system. That is a careful answer. It is the answer I can prove. And the answer you can't. Mason set down the coffee. Rusk either allowed the failures, caused the failures, or is so incompetent that someone has used his system for 14 months without him understanding it. None of those should leave him in charge today. Lenora looked toward the cafeteria entrance. Elara agrees. He followed her gaze. Elara entered with a hospital aide, pushing the chair she used when pain or exhaustion made walking unsafe. The media liked to describe her as fully recovered from the assault that had scarred her temple. The truth was less convenient. A fractured pelvis, nerve damage, and 2 spinal surgeries had left her with weakness on the left side, unpredictable pain, and an endurance limit she guarded more carefully than company secrets. Most days, she used a cane in private and stubbornness in public. After the Lake Union attack, both had run out. Mason had known about the injuries from her medical security file. He had not known how much work went into making the world believe they were behind her. She stopped at the table. The brass compass hung from her wrist by its red cord. You are not suspended, she said. Rust's memo says otherwise. I own the company. Lenora raised an eyebrow. The board would enjoy hearing you simplify governance that way. Elara ignored her. Donovan has been placed on administrative leave pending external review. Mason low oaked at Lenora. She nodded once. Who controls security? He asked. You, Elara said. No. The answer came so quickly that the aide looked startled. Elara's eyes narrowed. Explain. I can protect you or rebuild the corporate system. Not both alone. Putting one person above every access layer is how you got here. You're refusing a promotion. I'm refusing a structural mistake. Lenora looked almost pleased. Mason continued. Bring in an independent incident response firm. Separate executive protection from systems audit. Give legal custody of the records. Keep me on your detail with authority over immediate movement only. Elara held his gaze. You have been employed 25 days. I know. You have declined my instructions more often than most board members. That may explain why the company still has the same problems. Lenora actually smiled this time. Elara turned to her. Hire the firm. By noon, Voss Meridian had retained Northline Rusk, a small forensic security company led by a former municipal cybercrime prosecutor named Arjun Mehta. Rusk's badges were disabled, his office sealed, and every command log copied under legal supervision. The board received notice. So did the press, because someone leaked the administrative leave. Within 30 minutes, the headline shifted from attempted abduction to internal chaos at Voss Meridian. That was the first sign the attack had a second purpose. The board chair, Harriet Sloan, called an emergency session for Friday. Harriet was 62, silver-haired, professionally warm, and unrelated to anyone else in the company despite the familiar surname. She had invested in Elara when Voss Meridian operated from 2 rooms over a bicycle shop and had defended her through the first acquisition. That history made her concern more dangerous, not less. The board cannot ignore the security failures, Harriet said during the preliminary call, or the pattern of personnel turnover, or the operational concentration around you. The turnover was manufactured, Elara replied. That is an allegation. The abduction van is evidence. It is evidence of a threat, not of internal conspiracy. Mason stood outside the camera frame, listening. Harriet continued. You have resisted delegated authority for years. Now your personal security has compromised corporate operations and exposed employees. We need temporary separation between your office and daily control while the investigation proceeds. There it was. Not removal. Temporary separation. The polite phrase for taking the wheel while the driver was still conscious. Elara's face went still. You want me to take leave? I want you alive, rested, and protected from the appearance that your judgment is being shaped by trauma. The call ended 20 minutes later, with no agreement. Elara remained at the conference table after the screen went dark. Mason stood near the door. Lenora collected notes at the far end, then quietly left them alone. You were right, Elara said. About what? Someone benefits if I become impossible to protect. Mason moved to the chair across from her but did not sit until she nodded. The board doesn't need to be part of the threat. They only need to respond predictably to it. Harriet thinks she is saving the company. That makes her easier to use. Elara's thumb moved across the compass face. Preston used to say the same thing about her. Preston wanted you removed. He wanted me contained. The words came flat and tired. Mason waited. Elara looked toward the windows, where rain blurred the lake into pewter. Voss Meridian began with my routing model. Preston was the business operator. He understood investors' scale and how to speak calmly while taking ownership of another person's idea. We were good together until we weren't. What changed? My brother died. Mason knew the public version. Julian Voss, 39, had been killed in a collision involving an autonomous freight convoy in Oregon. The ape's accident occurred on a partner route running Voss Meridian software. Investigators blamed a sensor failure in the lead vehicle and inadequate human oversight. Elara withdrew for 3 months after the funeral. Preston became acting chief executive. When she returned, he proposed selling the company to a transportation conglomerate. The collision was not caused by our platform, she said. A subcontractor disabled a safety override to meet a delivery window. Preston knew the partner had been bypassing controls. He signed a confidential settlement 6 weeks before Julian died. Mason felt the shape of the wound before she named it. You found out after. I found the emails in his private archive. He said he protected the company. He said he had no reason to believe the behavior would continue. He said Julian chose to be on that road. Her voice did not break. That made it worse. I ended the engagement, she continued. Blocked the sale, reported the subcontractor. Preston resigned and told the board grief had made me irrational. 3 weeks later, the first threat arrived. Why wasn't he prosecuted? Because knowing a partner violated policy is not the same as causing a death. Because the settlement language was careful. Because wealthy people rarely write their crimes as sentences. Mason thought of the shoe. Everyone walks away from you. You believe Preston is behind this? I believed it at first. And now I think someone wants me to keep believing it. Mason nodded. Rusk investigated Preston. Rusk controlled each guard. Rusk controlled the incident records and command routes. He also protected me for 6 years. Before or after Julian died. Both. That doesn't clear him. No, she looked down at the compass. It makes the answer expensive. That sentence stayed with Mason. Truth was often expensive. It cost the version of the past a person had used to survive. It cost relationships, jobs, certainty. Sometimes it cost the right to believe that a betrayal had begun recently, instead of living beside you for years. Northline's first findings arrived the next day. The dead contractor badge had been generated using a dormant administrator token assigned to Rusk's deputy, Maribel Shaw. Shaw denied involvement and produced travel records showing she had been in Vancouver during the badge event. Her token had been copied months earlier. The Lake Union route change came through the command platform under Kessler's credentials, but Kessler had been physically beside Mason when the order was issued. The parking garage tracker was placed during a maintenance blackout approved by Rusk himself. Every path led near him. None ended at him. Arjun Mehta described it as intentional ambiguity. The actor understands evidentiary thresholds, he said during a secure briefing. Enough internal access to manipulate operations. Enough discipline to route actions through other people. Enough knowledge of Ms. Voss's behavior to predict response. An insider, Harriet said over video, or a former insider with current help, Arjun replied. The board session remained scheduled. Mason increased residential security and moved Elara from her glass-walled lake house to a discreet company-owned property on Bainbridge Island. She objected for 13 minutes, then accepted when he showed her drone footage from the previous night. A small quadcopter hovering beyond the legal property boundary. Camera pointed toward her bedroom windows. The island house sat behind cedar trees on a steep rise above the sound. It was smaller than her primary residence, but no less controlled. Concrete core, reinforced shutters, independent generator, private dock. The kind of place designed by people who believed danger could be solved with materials. Piper visited on Saturday because June had volunteered at a community health fair, and Mason refused to leave his daughter with an unfamiliar sitter while the threat level remained high. He brought board games, ski, work, and enough snacks to survive a winter. Elara looked at the bags. How long is she staying? 6 hours. You packed for an expedition. Children turned low blood sugar into political instability. Piper entered behind him, wearing a yellow raincoat and carrying a cardboard lighthouse. The brass compass still hung from Elara's wrist. You still have it, Piper said. I haven't found the way home yet. Piper seemed to consider whether this was metaphor or logistics. Maybe home moved. Elara went very quiet. Mason pretended to be checking the alarm panel, so neither woman had to acknowledge what had happened. The day passed with unexpected ease. Piper built the lighthouse on the dining table and asked Elara to help wire a tiny battery light. Elara approached the task like a product launch, reading the instructions twice and redesigning the switch. Placement. Piper rejected the redesign because the keeper needs to reach it when she is sleepy. Elara accepted the criticism with more grace than she showed most vice presidents. At lunch, Piper asked why bodyguards kept leaving. Mason nearly dropped the plate. Elara answered before he could. Some were asked to leave, some chose to. Why? Because I made the work difficult. On purpose. Sometimes, Piper dipped a carrot into hummus. Dad says people test doors when they don't trust locks. Mason frowned. When did I say that? When our bathroom door got stuck. That was about pinches. Things can be two things. Elara looked at Piper with solemn interest. Why do you think I test people? Piper shrugged. So you can say you knew they would leave? The room went still. Mason started to intervene, but Elara lifted a hand. And what would you recommend? She asked. Stop helping them. Piper returned to her carrot. Elara looked out toward the water. That sounds unpleasant. It probably is. Later, while Piper napped on the sofa under a company blanket, Mason found Elara on the covered deck. Wind moved the dark water below. She had the compass open in one palm, its needle trembling north. Your daughter is invasive, she said. She gets that from my mother. I assumed you, that too. He stayed near the door, leaving space between them. Julian was the only person I never tested, Elara said. He knew everything ugly about me before I had enough power to hide it. After he died, everyone else had to qualify. No one can qualify for being your brother. I know that intellectually. That's usually where knowing starts. She looked at him. How did you stop testing the world after Naomi died? Mason leaned against the cedar post. I didn't. I tested it constantly. I checked Piper's breathing at night, read every ingredient label, took the same route to school so nothing unexpected could enter. I tried to reduce life until I could manage the possible losses. What changed? Piper got scared of thunderstorms. Elara waited. One night, she asked if thunder could break the roof. I told her no. She asked how I knew. I started explaining construction and weather. She said, but how do you know nothing bad will happen? The wind pressed rain against the railing. I realized I had built our whole life around pretending I could answer that. I couldn't. So I told her the truth. Something bad might happen, and if it did, we would face it together. Elara's gaze dropped to the compass. That satisfied an 8-year-old. She was 6. Standards were lower. A quiet laugh escaped her. Mason smiled. Then the smile faded. Protection isn't a promise that nothing happens. It's a promise you won't face it alone. Elara closed the compass lid. That sounds dangerously close to loyalty. It probably is. She held out the compass. I should return this. Mason looked at the red cord stretched between them. Have you found the way home? No. Then keep it. Her hand lowered. The board meeting on Friday did not remove Elara. It did something more strategic. By a vote of 5-4, the directors created a temporary executive risk committee with authority to review her travel, communications, and major operational decisions until the investigation concluded. Harriet chaired it. The resolution sounded protective. In practice, it placed a lock around the chief executive and handed the key to people who could be influenced without ever committing a crime. Elara left the meeting without speaking to anyone. Mason followed her through the private corridor to the elevator. Inside, the doors closed. She stood with one hand on her cane and the other pressed against the wall. He saw the pain before she admitted it. Chair is downstairs, he said. I don't need it. You are shaking. I am angry. You can be angry sitting down. Her head turned sharply. Do not manage me. I'm not. I'm observing that the left leg you injured is about to stop cooperating. For 1 second, she looked like she might strike him. Then the elevator shifted slightly, and her knee buckled. Mason caught her around the waist before she hit the wall. The contact changed everything and nothing. He had supported her before, during movement drills, always procedural, always announced. This was instinct. Her hand closed on his shoulder. Her breath stopped near his collar. For one suspended moment, they were too close for the language of employer and guard. Then she pulled away. I'm fine. No, Mason pressed the emergency hold and guided her to the narrow bench along the elevator wall. She sat because the alternative had become impossible. The elevator hummed around them. I hate that phrase, she said. Which one? I'm fine. Everyone says it when the truth would create work. Mason crouched enough to meet her eye level without looming. Then, don't say it. What should I say? The truth. Her face remained controlled, but the control had become transparent. I am tired, she said. I am in pain. My board has converted my survival into a governance problem. The man who built my security may have built the threats, and I cannot tell whether trusting you is intelligence or another form of panic. Mason did not answer quickly. The first 3 are facts, he said. The last one takes time. She studied his face. You don't need me to trust you. I need you to follow the plan when the plan is sound. Trust can catch up. The elevator doors opened on the garage level. Luis waited with the chair. Mason stood and offered Elara his hand. She looked at it. Then she took it. The gesture lasted only long enough to transfer her weight. It stayed with both of them much longer. The photograph arrived the following Monday, in Piper's school email account. It showed her walking beside June outside the bakery beneath Mason's apartment. The image had been taken from across the street. Piper wore her yellow raincoat. June carried groceries. A red circle had been drawn around the brass key on June's ring, and beneath the photograph, someone had typed, "Every system has a family entrance." Mason saw it at 7:03 in the morning while standing outside Elara's office. For 5 seconds, the world narrowed to the image. He noticed everything at once: the reflection in the bakery window, the angle of the curb, the blurred white van parked beyond the bus stop, the date embedded in the file 3 days earlier, the way Piper's hand reached toward June's shopping bag, because she always tried to carry the lightest thing. Then training returned. He called June. No answer. He called Piper's school. She had not arrived. He called the building manager downstairs. June's car was still parked behind the bakery. Mason was moving before the final ring ended. Elara stepped into the hallway as he reached the elevator. What happened? He showed her the phone. Every trace of sleep left her face. "Go," she said. "I need your detail transferred. Kessler is downstairs." Kessler's credentials were used during Lake Union. "Then take Louise and leave me here." "No, Mason. I'm not pillar acing you under a compromised command structure while I run blind." He opened the secure channel to Northline and gave Arjun the facts. Within 90 seconds, Piper's school route was flagged, June's phone location requested, and 2 off-duty officers dispatched to the apartment. Elara canceled every meeting herself and ordered the executive floor sealed. The elevator doors opened. Kessler waited beside the vehicle, confused by the sudden lockout. Mason looked at him. "Where is Rusk?" "Still on leave." "Where physically?" "I don't know." "Find out." They crossed the bridge to West Seattle, under rain and sirens. Mason sat in the front passenger seat, phone in one hand, map in the other. He refused to imagine the interior of an empty apartment. He refused to let fear complete a story without evidence. At 7:19, June called. "We're fine," she said before he could speak. "Piper left her science project. We turned around. My phone was under the car seat." Mason closed his eyes. Air returned to his lungs so sharply it hurt. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock the rear entrance. Police are coming." "What happened?" "I'll tell you when I arrive." Piper came onto the line. "Dad, I'm here." "You sound weird." "I'm breathing too fast." "Then count the window corners." It was something he had taught her during panic. "Name 4 corners, 3 sounds, 2 textures, 1 safe person." He looked at the windshield. 4 corners, 3 sounds, rain tires, your voice, 2 textures, seatbelt, phone case, 1 safe person. He looked back at Elara. She sat in the rear, beside the sealed window, the compass in her hand, face white with controlled fury. "You," he told Piper. The apartment showed no sign of entry. The rear lock had not been touched. Police found the white van from the photograph abandoned, 3 blocks away, cleaned and stripped of registration. The image was a threat, not an attempt. That distinction comforted no one. Mason moved Piper and June to the Bainbridge safe house before noon. Piper protested missing school until she saw the police in the stairwell and understood that adults had crossed into the serious part of the conversation. She packed her lighthouse, 2 books, and 1 shoe she believed belonged to a doll but could not identify. Elara had arrived ahead of them. She stood in the main room with her cane, arguing by phone with Harriet Sloan. "No," she said. "I will not remove him from the detail because someone threatened his child. That is the result they want." Harriet's voice carried faintly through the speaker. "His personal vulnerability is now a corporate risk. His personal vulnerability is an 8-year-old girl." "Exactly." Mason entered in time to hear the word. Elara ended the call without farewell. Piper went directly to her and looked at the compass. "You still haven't found home?" Elara's expression shifted. "I may be getting closer." Piper nodded, then went with June to choose a bedroom. Mason waited until they were upstairs. "Harriet is right about one thing." Elara turned. "Do not start. My family changes the risk picture. Your family existed when I hired you. They were not targeted when you hired me. And if you leave now, what lesson does the threat learn?" That threatening my daughter works. Yes. He looked toward the staircase. I don't care what lesson they learn if she stays alive. The answer struck Elara. She went still, then looked away. Mason continued more quietly. I need to step off your immediate detail until Piper is secured somewhere outside the current network. 48 hours. Northline can cover you. No, this isn't a request. Her eyes flashed. You have spent a month telling me that protection requires listening to difficult facts. Here is one. Separating us is the attack. Here is another. I cannot stand beside you and watch every road around my child. Then bring her into the system. The system is compromised. Build a new one. He almost answered with anger. Then the words reached their actual meaning. Build a new one? Mason looked at the house map on the security tablet. At the isolated locks, duplicate identities, route channels, and approval layers that had failed because each had been designed separately. Voss Meridian routed freight through changing weather, road closures, labor interruptions, mechanical failure, and human error. Its platform could see a disruption anywhere in a national network and reroute thousands of vehicles before a driver knew a road had closed. Yet the company protected its people through static schedules, predictable hierarchies, and credentials that treated trust as a permanent setting. What if the protection system worked like your freight platform? He asked. Elara's anger paused. Explain. No fixed safe route, no single command authority. Live risk scoring based on access, camera behavior, employee movement, vehicle condition, and outside signals. If one credential acts outside its pattern, the system doesn't just log it. It changes the route and requires independent confirmation, adaptive executive movement, not only executive. Employees under threat, drivers carrying sensitive loads, engineers traveling with prototypes, families if the exposure reaches them. Elara moved toward the table. The platform already has route anomaly detection for cargo, not people. She opened her laptop. Because human protection depends on judgment, so does freight. Your system doesn't replace drivers. It gives them better information before the bad minute. The argument transformed in real time. Fear became architecture. Anger became questions. Elara pulled up the Meridian routing engine. Mason sketched security inputs on a paper pad. June came downstairs 20 minutes later and found them speaking over each other, while Piper arranged crackers into compass points beside the laptop. What is this? June asked. Piper answered. They're making a computer that knows when people are lying. Not exactly, Mason said. Elara did not look up. Close enough for the prototype? They called it Wayfinder because Piper refused every corporate alternative. Human continuity layer sounded, in her words, like a robot blanket. Adaptive protective routing sounded like homework. Wayfinder sounded like the compass and did not require explanation. By evening, Arjun had joined remotely. Lenora brought secure copies of access logs. 2 trusted engineers came to the island under separate routes and surrendered all personal devices at the dock. For the first time since Mason began, protection stopped being a wall around Elara and became something they were building together. The initial model found a pattern before midnight. Each major incident had been preceded by a low-level operational anomaly that Rusk's system classified separately: a camera update, a maintenance work order, a driver reassignment, a badge reset. The calendar synchronization error. No single event crossed a threat threshold. Combined, they formed a preparation sequence. Wayfinder linked them. The same sequence had started again 3 days before Piper's photograph arrived. Camera maintenance at her school intersection. A municipal traffic sensor reset. A temporary contractor credential issued to a company called Echelon Civic Systems. A Raicha account created using an email variation of June's name. Echelon Civic Systems appeared in 6 other incident chains. Lenora searched corporate records. The company was owned through 2 layers of holding firms by Cade's strategic partners. Preston Cade. Elara stared at the screen. Too obvious. Maybe he stopped caring, Arjun said. Or someone wants the investigation to end there, Mason replied. They dug deeper. Echelon's invoices were real. It provided traffic day consulting to cities and private logistics firms. Cade Strategic owned 40%. The remaining 60 belonged to a silent investment vehicle named North Passage Holdings. North Passage had on authorized representative Maribel Shaw, Rusk's deputy. Lenora sat back. There is your insider. Mason looked at the credential history. Maribel's token had been cloned while she traveled. She could have cloned it herself. She could also be a shield. Who hired her? He asked. Elara answered. Donovan. Who approved Echelon as a data vendor? Donovan. Who recommended Cade Strategic for municipal integration after Preston left? Elara's face changed. Donovan, she said. The room fell silent. The answer was moving closer, and each step cost her another version of the man she had trusted. The next morning, Mason arranged for Piper and June to move to a protected rental under Northline control. Piper refused to leave the Compass with Elara because, she said, borrowing is not over just because things got worse. She hugged Mason too tightly at the dock and whispered, "Come when you say, I will. Late is not gone. Late is not gone." He watched the boat pull away until it became a small white shape against the gray water. When he turned, Elara stood behind him. "You should go with her," she said. "I told her I would come when the work was done. She would understand. That isn't the same as keeping the promise." Elara looked out at the fading boat. "You should not have to choose. No one should. But you are." Mason met her eyes. "I'm choosing to finish making both of you safer." The words hung between them, too personal for a protection briefing, too true to retreat from. Elara looked away first. Day 29 arrived, with a board directive requiring Elara to surrender operational authority at noon, unless Northline produced definitive evidence connecting an internal officer to the attacks. Harriet framed the deadline as temporary stability. The market had begun reacting. 2 clients paused contract renewals. An acquisition fund contacted directors privately. Preston Cade issued a public statement offering any assistance necessary to protect the company we built together. Mason read the statement twice. "He wants to be invited back," he said. Elara stood at the window of the island house, cane in one hand. "He has always preferred doors other people open for him." Northline obtained a worn-back copy of North Passage Holdings bank activity that morning. Payments flowed to Maribel Shaw. They also flowed to a private security consultancy registered to Donovan Rusk's brother-in-law. Enough to justify arrest interviews, not enough to prove who commanded what. At 10:15, police detained Maribel at the Vancouver border. At 10:42, Donovan disappeared from the apartment where he was required to remain during leave. At 11:03, Wayfinder flagged a live preparation sequence around the Bainbridge house. The generator entered remote diagnostic mode without request. A forestry contractor badge activated near the private access road. Marine tracking showed a maintenance vessel slowing near the cove. The north camera began a firmware update. Mason shut the laptop. "We move." Elara did not argue. The emergency plan called for departure by boat from the private dock, but Wayfinder marked the marine route as compromised. The access road showed 2 unverified vehicles. Air extraction would take 20 minutes. They had no clean route. Mason looked at the terrain map. The house had been selected because it was difficult to reach. That also made it difficult to leave. "Old fire trail," he said. "West Ridge. It meets the park road 2 miles north." Elara looked at the contour lines. "It isn't accessible. You can walk sections with support, not 2 miles. You won't have to." The service garage held an electric utility cart used by grounds crews. Narrow enough for the trail. Quiet. Unregistered. On the main fleet system. Mason loaded a medical kit, emergency blanket, water, and a compact communications unit. Lenora secured the evidence drive inside her coat. 2 Northline officers took rear positions. They left the house at 11:17. Rain thickened in the cedar canopy. The cart moved slowly over roots and wet gravel. Mason drove while Elara sat beside him, one hand gripping the frame. The compass cord wound around her wrist. The trail descended toward a wooden bridge over a narrow ravine. Wayfinder alerted on the communications unit. Unregistered movement behind them. Mason checked the mirror. A dark utility vehicle had entered the trail. Faster, Lenora said. The bridge won't take speed. The vehicle behind gained. They reached the bridge. Mason saw the cut cable before the front wheels touched the planks. One of the two support lines had been severed halfway through and disguised with dark tape. He braked hard. The cart slid sideways on wet gravel and struck the rail. Elara's shoulder hit the frame. One Northline officer jumped free. The vehicle behind stopped 20 yards back, blocking retreat. Two masked men stepped out. Mason looked at the ravine, the damaged bridge, and the steep footpath climbing toward the ridge on the far side. No vehicle could cross safely. "We go on foot," he said. Elara stirred at the climb. "I can't." "You can with me." Shots struck the cart's rear panel. The Northline officers returned fire from cover. Lenora crawled toward the bridge entrance, with the evidence drive held beneath her. Mason moved to Elara's side. "I'm going to carry you across," he said. "The bridge is failing." "I know. You have officers. They're holding the trail. Leave me and take the evidence." Mason looked at her. It was a sentence every threat had been teaching her to expect. The logical choice. The useful choice. The choice that turned a person into weight when the system narrowed. He unfastened the emergency strap from the cart. "No," he said. "Mason, I did not stay 29 days to abandon you on the 30th. The words hit her harder than the gunfire. He secured the strap around them, lifted her against his chest, and stepped onto the damaged bridge. The wood shifted under his weight. Behind him, another shot cracked through the rain. Ahead, the ridge waited, beyond a ravine full of dark water. The first plank bowed beneath Mason's boot. He stopped, shifted Elara's weight higher against his chest, and tested the next board before committing. The bridge was little more than a maintenance crossing, 4 feet wide and slick with rain. One support cable remained intact. The other sagged toward the ravine, where the cut had opened under tension. Water moved 20 feet below, black and fast between stone. Elara's arms were locked around his shoulders. He could feel the effort it cost her not to fight the position, not to turn fear into instruction. "Mason," she said near his ear. "The center span is pulling left. I know. You need to stay near the live cable. I know. You keep saying that. It saves time." The bridge shook as Lenora crawled onto it behind them. A bullet struck the rail at the entrance, splintering wood. One of the Northline officers shouted for them to move. Mason took the next step. The damaged span rolled under his feet. His right shoulder slammed against the cable. Elara tightened her hold. The compass swung from her wrist and struck his chest once. A small brass knock beneath the gunfire. "Find the way home." He moved again. 7 steps to the center. 8, 9. The cut support gave another inch. The bridge tilted sharply. Lenora flattened herself against the boards. Mason bent his knees and let the movement pass through him, instead of correcting too hard. Elara made a sound she tried to swallow. "Look at me," he said. "I am looking at the bridge. That's the problem." Her eyes shifted to his. "4 corners," he said. "What?" "4 corners." Understanding arrived. The exercise Piper had used in the car. Elara stared at him as rain ran over both their faces. "Your left eye, your right eye, your mouth, the scar on your chin. That scar is not a corner. It is close enough. Breeze sounds, rainwater, you breathing badly. 2 textures. Your coat, the strap, 1 safe person." The breech lurched. Elara did not look away. "You?" Mason stepped over the broken center joint. The far half held. He crossed the last 10 feet, with his legs burning, and his left arm beginning to numb beneath her weight. When his boots reached solid ground, Lenora was 3 yards behind. Mason set Elara down against a cedar trunk, kept one hand at her back until he felt her balance, then turned to help Lenora off the bridge. The first Northline officer crossed next. The second remained behind the cart, returning fire until the masked men moved into the trees. "Come on," Mason shouted. The officer sprinted toward the bridge. A shot caught him high in the vest and spun him sideways. He fell, recovered, and crawled onto the boards. The attackers advanced. Mason drew his sidearm but held fire. Rain, trees, unstable bridge, no clean target. The officer reached the center. One of the masked men stepped into view at the entrance. Elara's breath changed. That's Donovan. Mason saw it then. The stance, left shoulder slightly lower from an old injury. Rusk wore a face covering, but bodies carried their histories. Rusk raised his weapon. Mason fired once into the bridge rail beside him. The shot forced him back. The officer crossed the final span and collapsed on the far bank. Move, Mason said. They climbed. The ridge path was too narrow for carrying Elara safely, and too steep for her to manage without support. Mason looped the emergency strap around her waist and his, creating a moving anchor. Lenora took the evidence drive and went ahead. The uninjured officer supported his partner. Behind them, the attackers crossed the bridge, one at a time. Elara planted her cane into mud, moved the left leg, then the right. Each step required calculation. Rain soaked her hair flat against her face. The pulsed executive disappeared. What remained was effort without witnesses. 30 yards to the service road, Mason said. That is a lie. It is an estimate. It is a motivational lie. Fine, 50. She took another step. I preferred 30. The path turned sharply around a boulder. Mason heard movement behind and pushed them into a shallow hollow beneath exposed roots. Lenora and the officers continued toward the road to draw pursuit. Mason pulled a camouflage emergency sheet over the hollow and killed the radio light. Elara's breathing was ragged. Pain had emptied the color from her face. You should go, she whispered. No. You can reach the road faster, alone. No. They want me? The evidence is with Lenora. Mason looked at her, in the dim green shadow. You keep offering yourself as the easiest thing to remove. I am being practical. You are repeating what they taught you. Her eyes flashed, despite the pain. This is not a therapy session. Good, I'm not qualified. Footsteps moved along the path below. Mason pressed one finger to his lips. Rusk's voice came through the rain, no longer disguised by distance. The road is covered. She cannot walk far. Check the slope. Elara closed her eyes. The second voice belonged to a man Mason did not recognize. Cade wants her conscious. There it was. Not proof for a court, perhaps proof for the body. Mason activated the silent recorder on his watch. Rusk answered. Cade wants the authorization keys. I want this finished. Their footsteps moved past. Elara opened her eyes. The wound in her face was not surprise. It was confirmation. He protected Julian, she whispered. Maybe once. I hired him because Julian trusted him. Trust is an evidence that never expires. She looked toward the path. He built every failure. He built a system where he was the only person allowed to interpret failure. Mason waited until the footsteps faded, then checked the Wayfinder unit. The device had lost network connection but continued recording local motion signals from paired emergency beacons. Lenore's beacon moved north. Attackers' stolen company credentials registered behind them because Wayfinder had cached their radio signatures at the safe house. A system did not need to be all-seeing to be useful. It needed to notice when the pieces lied together. Mason sent a compressed distress burst through the Marine backup channel, embedding their location, and Rusk captured audio. The transmission status blinked amber. Not confirmed. They moved again. Elara made 23 steps before her left leg failed. Mason caught her under the arms. She bit back a cry and looked at the incline with open hatred. I cannot do another 50, she said. Then we do 5. That is absurd. 5 is still a direction. He repositioned the strap, took more of her weight, and counted. 1. Her cane sank into wet soil. 2. A branch snapped below. 3. She dragged the left foot forward. 4. The road appeared through the trees, not close, but real. 5. Mason stopped again. Elara breathed twice. 5. They repeated the distance in small agreements. 5 steps, rest. 5 steps, rest. No promises about the whole ridge. No lie that it did not hurt. No transformation into inspiration, just the next useful thing. At the road, they found an empty park maintenance truck with keys missing and one tire slashed. Lenora had left a strip of red evidence tape on the mirror pointing east. Mason followed it toward an old ranger storage station half a mile away. They had covered perhaps 100 yards when an engine started behind them. Rusk had reached the maintenance truck with a portable inflator and was moving on the damaged tire. Mason looked at the open road, then at Elara. Carrying her would be faster now, but leave him unable to respond. He crouched in front of her. On my back. She stared at him. You are injured? He looked down. Blood had soaked through the left sleeve of his coat where a bridge splinter or bullet fragment had cut the upper arm. He had not noticed. Later, he said, you cannot carry me half a mile. I don't need half a mile. I need the next bend. The engine grew louder. Elara climbed onto his back with help from the strap. He stood, pain flashing through the injured arm, and ran. Not fast, not elegantly fast enough. The road curved around the ridge. Beyond the bend, a utility clearing opened beside a decommissioned fire lookout. A helicopter descended through the rain. Northline, the distress burst had transmitted. Arjun met the lean from the open door, signaling them forward. 2 tactical officers covered the road. Rusk's truck rounded the bend, saw the helicopter, and braked hard. He tried to reverse. A county sheriff's vehicle blocked the lower road behind him. The man who had spent 14 months controlling every exit finally discovered what it meant to have none. Mason lowered Elara onto a stretcher beside the helicopter. Her hand caught his coat before the medic could move her. The evidence, she said. Lenora has it. The recording. Uploaded. Piper. Safe. She nodded. Then her gaze dropped to the blood on his sleeve. Apparently, you said later. It is later. The medic pushed between them and began cutting the sleeve. Rusk was arrested on the road. One attacker surrendered. The other escaped into the forest for 6 hours before a search team found him hiding in a drainage tunnel. The injured Northline officer survived with bruised ribs and a fractured collarbone. Lenora reached the ranger station with the evidence drive intact and an expression that suggested she intended to sue the mountain. Elara was flown to a private hospital in Seattle. Mason went in the second helicopter after receiving 9 stitches and a lecture about blood loss. The board deadline passed at noon, while both were in the air. Harriet Sloan, acting under the Risk Committee resolution, announced Elara's temporary leave at 12:08. At 12:19, Lenora released notice to the directors that Donovan Rusk had been arrested while participating in an armed attempt to seize the chief executive and obtain company authorization keys. At 12:27, Northline delivered the captured audio. At 12:41, Harriet withdrew the leave announcement. By 1 o'clock, the company had entered the kind of silence that precedes either collapse or truth. Mason reached Elara's hospital room at 4. Piper and June were already there, under Northline escort. Piper ran toward him, stopped when she saw the bandage, then completed the hug at half strength. You got hurt. I noticed. You promised to come. I came. Blight. Not gone. She pressed her face against his chest. Elara watched from the bed. Her left leg was elevated, not newly injured, but inflamed from the climb. Mud still marked the edge of one hand, where the nurses had missed it. The brass compass lay on the bedside table. Piper released Mason and walked to Elara. Did he carry you? More than once. He does that. I had gathered. Piper climbed carefully onto the visitor chair. Are you still the CEO? For the moment. That means yes. Elara looked at Mason. Your daughter has no respect for uncertainty. She thinks it wastes daylight. June left with Piper to find food, giving the adults privacy so deliberately that neither could pretend it was accidental. Mason sat beside the bed. Elara picked up the compass and held it toward him. I believe this belongs to your family? He looked at the brass case. Borrowing has a return part. Yes. Did you find home? Her expression shifted, and for once she did not hide the answer behind a sharper one. I found people who came back, she said. I'm not sure whether that is the same thing. It's usually how home starts. She looked down. I told you to leave me on the ridge. I remember. You refused. I remember that too. You could have died. So could you. That is not balance. No, it is not a calculation. Elara's fingers closed around the compass. I don't understand why you stayed. Mason thought of all the answers that would make the moment easier. Duty, contract, training. None were false, none were complete. Because leaving you there would have been wrong, he said. And because somewhere between the tracker and the garage, and Piper telling you home could move, you stopped being only the person I was paid to protect. The room became very quiet. What did I become? She asked. He met her eyes. Someone I was not willing to lose. The truth landed without decoration. Elara looked away, toward the window, but not before he saw tears gather and remain, unshed, because she still did not owe anyone the performance of breaking. When she looked back, her voice was steady. That is a dangerous thing to say to your employer. Then you should probably stop being my employer. A small, incredulous laugh escaped her. Are you resigning from a hospital chair? I'm suggesting the protection contract was never going to work forever. And what replaces it? Wayfinder needs someone who understands protection outside a command bunker. I can build that. You can hire a full detail with independent oversight. You are trying to move into product development. I'm trying to stop being the only door. Elara considered him for a long time. And the rest of what you said? That doesn't belong in an employment agreement. No, she set the compass between them. It doesn't. The criminal investigation broke open over the next week. Maribel Shaw had not designed the attacks. She had accepted payments to clone credentials and suppress minor anomalies. Believing Rusk was conducting unauthorized loyalty tests at Elara's direction, Rusk had told her the incidents were controlled. When the attacks escalated, she attempted to withdraw. He threatened her with evidence that made her appear responsible for everything. Preston Cade had supplied money, municipal data access, and the acquisition plan. His objective was not murder. Death would have destroyed the company's value and turned Elara into a martyr. He wanted fear, instability, and eventual removal. Rusk wanted control and revenge. Elara had begun shifting security architecture toward automated oversight before Julian's death, reducing Rusk's private authority. Preston offered him a future role after the acquisition. Together, they built a campaign where every bodyguard failure became proof that Elara was the problem. The kidnapping attempt at Lake Union was meant to obtain biometric authorization and force a confidential transfer of key voting rights. The Bainbridge attack came after Wayfinder exposed the preparation sequence. Desperation made them visible. Evidence rarely arrived as one perfect confession. It arrived as payments, access logs, copied tokens, route instructions, and the recorded sentence on a rainy ridge. Together, the pieces stopped lying. The board met 10 days after the attack. Elara entered with a cane and the brass compass in her pocket. Mason walked beside her, not as bodyguard but as acting director of the Wayfinder Initiative. Northland officers handled protection. No single commander held all movement authority. Every credential required live contextual verification. The lesson had become structure. Harriet Sloan opened the meeting with an apology. Elara accepted the responsibility, not the absolution. Concern is not governance, she said. You allowed a threat actor to convert my isolation into evidence against me. We will not repeat that with any employee in this company. She presented the investigation. Then she presented Wayfinder. The platform combined human judgment with live anomaly linking. It treated threats not as isolated alarms, but as patterns across facilities, identity systems, vehicles, calendars, and external data. It required independent confirmation before high-risk route changes. It protected not only executives, but field teams, whistleblowers, drivers carrying dangerous loads, and employees whose families had become leverage. Mason demonstrated the system using a reconstruction of the Bainbridge sequence. On the screen, the camera update, generator diagnostic, contractor badge, marine vessel, and vehicle movement formed a visible chain. The old system had seen 5 harmless events. Wayfinder saw preparation. The board approved a full pilot unanimously. Harriet resigned from the risk committee and asked Elara to remain chief executive under a revised security governance charter. Elara agreed on one condition. No protection officer would ever report solely through a private chain controlled by one executive again. The condition passed. Preston Cade was arrested 2 days later at a private airfield outside Vancouver. Donovan Rusk was charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, assault, unlawful surveillance, and enough related offenses that even Lenora stopped listing them halfway through. The market recovered. Clients returned. The company did not collapse. But the public victory was not the part that changed Elara most. The change came in smaller rooms. The first small room was a rehabilitation studio on the 3rd floor of Ellar's lake house. She had avoided it for 6 weeks after the Bainbridge attack, not because the equipment frightened her, but because the ridge had changed the meaning of effort. Before, physical therapy had been private maintenance, something performed, so the public version of Elara Voss could continue moving through photographs without questions. After the ridge, every step carried the memory of mud, gunfire, and Mason counting 5 as though 5 were enough to build a future. Dr. Miriam Keene, her therapist, did not allow drama to become an excuse. You walked farther, under worse conditions, Miriam said, adjusting the support rail. I was being chased by armed men. I can arrange motivation, but the insurance paperwork would be ugly. Elara almost smiled. Mason stood outside the studio door with a Wayfinder tablet, pretending to review sensor calibration. He was no longer assigned to her immediate protection. A rotating North Line team covered the house, each officer supported by separate oversight and explicit authority to challenge both the principal and the command system. Elara had agreed to the arrangement because it was sound. She disliked it because the person outside the door was not technically supposed to be watching her. You may come in, she said. Mason looked up. I'm working. You have read the same diagnostic line 4 times. Maybe it's a complicated line. Mason. He entered and leaned against the wall beyond the rails. Miriam looked between them. Excellent. An audience does always improve human movement. Elara placed both hands on the support bars. Her left leg had recovered from the ridge inflammation, though the underlying weakness remained. She rose slowly, centered her weight, and waited for the tremor to settle. 5, Mason said. She turned her head. I did not ask you to count. No, you looked like you were waiting. I was breathing. Very dramatically, Miriam covered a laugh with a cough. Elara moved 1 foot forward. 1, then the other. 2. They did not pretend the steps were easy. They did not turn pain into moral superiority. They counted because a small distance was still a real distance, and because sometimes the whole future was too large to carry at once. 5 steps became 10. 10 became a walk to the window. At the glass, Elara stood looking across Lake Washington, while Mason remained behind her, close enough to help and far enough not to assume she needed it. That distance became the shape of their next few months. Wayfinder moved from emergency prototype to formal division. Mason built the operational team from people who understood both systems and human behavior. A transit safety engineer, a former domestic violence advocate experienced in relocation planning, a warehouse supervisor who had survived workplace stalking, a cyber analyst who distrusted perfect dashboards, and 2 protection specialists who believed humility was equipment. Elara reviewed every hire. She rejected 12 corporate names, 3 branding concepts, and a proposal to replace the brass compass icon with something more technologically assertive. Piper attended one design session by video and ended the argument. A compass is not weak, she said. It knows where it is, even when you don't. The icon remained. Mason's new role changed his schedule, but not the central fact of his life. He still packed Piper's lunch before sunrise. He still forgot to buy laundry detergent until the final load became a logistical emergency. He still checked the apartment door twice at night, though less often than before. Wayfinder paid well enough that he moved them from above the bakery into a modest house with 2 bedrooms, a small fenced yard, and a kitchen window facing west. Piper chose her room based on which wall could hold the cardboard lighthouse. Elara visited 3 weeks after the move. She arrived without press, ceremony, or an unnecessary motorcade. One protection vehicle waited down the block. She stood at the front door with a cane in one hand and a potted rosemary plant in the other. "Your mother said flowers create responsibility," she explained when Mason opened the door. "My mother has opinions about cut flowers. She has opinions about everything. That means she likes you." Elara looked briefly alarmed. "That is her expression of affection. Usually, Piper ran from the hallway and stopped just before colliding with her. "You came? I said I would. You're 6 minutes late. Traffic." Piper considered this, then nodded. "Late is not gone." Elara's gaze moved to Mason. The housewarming dinner was simple. Pasta, bread, salad June had brought and criticized while serving. Elara sat at a table whose surface had been refinished by Mason himself, one old watermark still visible beneath the lead varnish because Piper claimed it looked like an island. Conversation moved between school, Wayfinder, city, politics, and June's belief that every modern appliance had been designed by someone who hated repair technicians. For 2 hours, Elara was not the threatened chief executive or the woman whose security failures had become market news. She was simply present in a room where no one wanted a statement from her. After dinner, Piper brought out the brass compass. Elara had returned it to Mason at the hospital, but he had placed it on a shelf near the entryway rather than wearing it. Piper picked it up by the red cord and looked between them. "Who has it now?" she asked. "It stays here," Mason said. "That is not what I asked." Elara leaned back in the chair. "Your daughter negotiates like a regulator. She wants custody clarified." Piper held the compass toward Elara. "You borrowed it because you didn't know where home was." "Yes." "Then you gave it back." "Yes." "Did you find home?" The room quieted. Elara looked around the small dining area, at June stacking plates despite being told not to, at Piper, waiting with absolute seriousness, at Mason standing near the sink, not rescuing her from the question. "I found more than one place I can return to," she said. Piper accepted the answer. She hung the compass on a wooden peg beside the front door. "Then it goes there," she said. "So anyone leaving can borrow it." The compass became a household object after that. Mason carried it to a difficult board presentation. Piper took it to the school science fair. June borrowed it before a medical test and denied doing so until the red cord was found in her purse. Elara wore it beneath her jacket the day Preston Cade entered a plea agreement, and again when Donovan Russ's defense attorneys attempted to portray her as an unstable employer who had manufactured the threat through impossible expectations. She testified for 3 hours. The courtroom wanted a simpler woman, a victim or a tyrant, someone broken enough to pity or cold enough to blame. Elara gave them neither. She admitted the tests she had created. She admitted the mistakes. She described the security failures, the isolation campaign, the abduction attempt, the ridge, and the system that allowed one man to become interpreter of every danger he helped create. "When did you realize Mr. Rusk intended to abandon you?" the prosecutor asked. Elara looked toward the gallery, where Mason sat beside Lenora. "I realized the plan was not to abandon me," she said. "It was to convince me abandonment was the natural result of knowing me. Once I believed that, I did much of his work for him." Rusk was convicted on every major count. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions about justice, closure, and whether she forgave the people who had helped him. Elara stopped at the microphone only once. "Accountability is not closure," she said. "It is structure. Closure is private." Then she walked to the car with her cane and did not answer another question. Mason waited in the rear seat because Wayfinder had asked him to review the courthouse pilot in person. That was the official explanation. Elara entered beside him. The door closed. For a moment neither spoke. "You were good," he said. "I was accurate. Those can coexist." She looked out the window. He said, "No one stayed, because I made staying impossible." Mason heard the effort beneath the calm. He needed that to be true. "I did make it difficult." "Yes." She turned sharply. You could soften that. I could, but you would know. A reluctant smile appeared. Mason continued. Difficult is not impossible. And difficult is not deserving what happened. The car moved through downtown traffic. Elara's hand rested between them, on the seat, close but not touching. Mason looked at it. She noticed. Are we going to continue avoiding the obvious? She asked. I thought we were respecting governance. I am no longer your direct supervisor. You chair the executive committee that funds my division. I can recuse. You have prepared this argument. For several weeks, he looked at her fully. I have a daughter. I have met her. She comes first. She should. My life is not simple. Neither is mine. People will say I stayed for money. People have already said worse things with less imagination. He almost laughed. Elara's expression changed. The confidence remained, but something vulnerable stood beside it rather than behind it. I do not need a bodyguard who confuses protection with love, she said. I also do not want to spend the next year pretending the love is merely excellent risk management. Mason felt every prepared sentence leave him. You said love, he said. I am aware. Just checking. This is not the time to become slow. He reached for her hand. The gesture was small, almost conservative after everything they had survived. Her fingers closed around his. No alarm sounded. No system marked the moment as an anomaly. The city moved outside the glass as if nothing had changed. Everything had. Their first date happened at a neighborhood restaurant Piper selected, because the menu included grilled cheese and serious adult fish. June kept Piper for the evening and insisted on receiving a full report the next morning. Elara arrived in dark trousers, a green sweater, and no visible executive armor. Mason spent the first 10 minutes checking exits out of habit. She noticed and made him switch seats so he could see the front door without turning his head. That is either considerate or enabling, he said. Wayfinder will assess it later. They talked about things that had nothing to do with threats. Naomi, Julian, books, the first jobs they hated, the first money they earned. Elara admitted she could not cook anything. Mason admitted he had once ruined a custom staircase by reading the plans from the wrong elevation. They laughed more than either expected. When he walked her to the car, she kissed him first. It was not dramatic. No rain arrived on cue. No crowd witnessed it. She touched his face, gave him enough time to move away, and kissed him with the controlled courage of someone choosing risk without pretending it was safe. He kissed her back. Then her protection officer cleared his throat from 6 feet away and said, "The curb is becoming a static exposure." Elara closed her eyes. This is why no one likes security professionals. Mason smiled. I'm starting to see it. Wayfinder's first large public test came 6 months after the Bainbridge attack. The Port of Tacoma agreed to use the system across an autonomous freight corridor, employee transport network, and restricted container facility. The project required integrating badge behavior, route anomalies, maintenance events, and emergency communications without turning workers into permanently watched data points. Mason insisted on strict privacy controls. Elara insisted the controls be audited by labor representatives and independent counsel. The board complained about delay until the pilot identified a dangerous pattern within its first week. A subcontracted vehicle entered approved areas using valid credentials but repeatedly arrived during short camera maintenance windows. The old systems treated each event as authorized. Wayfinder linked the timing and flagged the sequence. Investigators found a cargo theft ring using legitimate access and operational gaps. No one was hurt. No dramatic rescue appeared online. A bad minute simply failed to happen. That was success. The platform expanded. Hospitals used it to protect staff facing domestic threats. Research companies used it for sensitive travel. Municipalities used limited versions during disaster evacuations. Voss Meridian created a support fund for employees whose families became targets because of their work. Every Wayfinder deployment required more than technology. Trained people, independent oversight, and explicit rules preventing one authority from becoming the whole truth. The business grew, but growth was not the only recovery. Elara changed the way she lived in increments. She stopped triggering false alarms to test officers. She asked questions instead. She allowed schedules to include rest without describing it as inefficiency. When pain required the chair, she used it. When the cane was enough, she used the cane. When she could walk without either, she did not make the moment into a referendum on strength. Her body became information rather than an enemy. She also learned to say when she was afraid. The first time happened during a late-night drive after a bored dinner. A motorcycle followed the car through 3 turns. The protection team initiated a route change. The rider turned away at the next intersection. Nothing happened. Elara sat silent for 2 minutes, then said, "I am afraid." No one rushed to deny the danger. Mason, seated beside her as partner rather than guard, said, "I know." The officer in front explained the route. Wayfinder showed the motorcycle had no continued correlation. Elara breathed until the fear became proportionate to the facts. That was progress too. Mason changed in quieter ways. He stopped treating every moment away from Piper as a debt. He let June keep her overnight without inventing 3 practical reasons to check in. He allowed Elara to help, not financially at first because pride had its own security architecture, but in time, she attended school meetings. She learned the name of Piper's favorite librarian. She kept allergy-safe snacks in both houses and pretended this was strategic inventory management. Piper called her Elara until one rainy afternoon when a classmate asked whether she was Piper's stepmother. Piper answered, not officially, but structurally, because she had overheard too many corporate meetings. Mason nearly drove off the road laughing when she told him. Elara considered the phrase with grave interest. It lacks emotional warmth. It is also terrifyingly accurate. Their life did not become simple. There were security reviews, court dates, travel, pain flares, anniversaries, and the ordinary griefs that do not disappear simply because love returns. Naomi remained part of the house. Her photograph stood beside the cardboard lighthouse. Piper spoke about her without fear that Elara would feel displaced. Elara spoke about Julian. No one competed with the dead. They made room. A year after Mason's first day, Voss Meridian held the formal opening of the Wayfinder Operations Center. The date was not chosen for symbolism. It happened to be the first available Monday after the regulatory audit. Piper noticed anyway. 365 days, she announced at breakfast. Leap year, Mason said. 366. You ruined it. Accuracy matters. That sounds like Elara. The operations center occupied a renovated brick building near the waterfront. It had open sight lines, independent command rooms, privacy barriers, and no single glass office placed above everyone else. A large brass compass icon marked the central wall. Beneath it, a simple line read, "See the pattern. Keep the person." Reporters attended. Employees brought families. Luis, now director of protective transport, stood near the demonstration floor. Kessler, cleared of involvement and humbled by the investigation, had joined Northline after completing retraining. Maribel Shaw was not there. Her cooperation agreement had not erased what she did, but it had helped expose the full network. Accountability, as Elara had said, was structure. Harriet Sloan attended from the back row. She and Elara had not returned to their old closeness. Some trust could be rebuilt. Some could only be understood accurately. They greeted each other with respect and distance. Mason gave the first presentation. He spoke about preparation sequences, contextual credentials, and the danger of systems that separated technical anomalies from human consequence. He did not mention heroism. He did not mention carrying Elara across the B ridge. The point of Wayfinder was that no one should need a heroic last second, because the earlier signals had been ignored. Then Elara came to the stage. She walked with her cane that day, not because the cameras were present, and not despite them, because that was what her body required after a difficult week. The brass compass hung around her neck on Piper's old red cord. No bodyguard lasted a month, she began. The room quieted. For a long time, I described that as evidence that qualified people could not manage the threat around me. Then I described it as evidence that people were unreliable. Both explanations protected me from a harder truth. Someone had designed the system to fail, but I had helped the failure by treating departure as proof and control as safety. She looked toward Mason and Piper in the front row. The person who changed that pattern did not do it by promising nothing bad would happen. He did it by refusing to let danger decide who had to stand alone. Mason felt Piper's hand slip into his. Elara continued. Wayfinder is not named for a machine that always knows the perfect route. It is named for the human promise to keep looking when the route disappears. The applause came slowly, then filled the building. After the crowd thinned, Piper pulled them toward the central compass wall for a photograph. Mason stood on one side, Elara on the other. Piper planted herself between them and held up the small original compass, which she had taken from the house peg that morning. We need both, she explained. Big one for the company, little one for actual emergencies. The photographer left. Everyone ready? Elara looked at Mason. Are we? He understood she was not asking about the picture. Yes, he said. The camera flashed. That evening, they returned to Mason's house, though calling it only Mason's had become inaccurate. Elara kept clothes in the upstairs closet and reports in the study. Her rosemary plant had survived despite June's predictions. A ramp had been integrated into the porch so cleanly that it looked like design rather than correction. Piper's lighthouse sat in the front window, its tiny lamp switching on automatically at dusk. Dinner was takeout because celebration had exhausted everyone. Piper fell asleep on the couch, halfway through a documentary about deep-sea creatures. Mason carried her upstairs, tucked the blanket under her chin, and returned to find Elara standing by the front door. She held the compass. This has become complicated property, she said. It belongs on the peg. I thought it belonged to Piper. It belonged to Naomi first, then me, then Piper, then you. I think the ownership model has failed. Elara turned the brass case over. Find the way home. Piper asked me something today, she said. That usually creates work. She asked whether I intended to marry you or continue conducting a multi-year pilot. Mason stared at her. Elara's composure developed a visible crack. I had prepared a more elegant transition into this conversation. How long have you been preparing it? Several months. And Piper completed deployment without authorization. He crossed the entryway until they stood close. Do you intend to marry me? He asked. She lifted one eyebrow. You are making me do all the work. You're the chief executive. That joke will become expensive. Mason took the compass from her hand, opened the lid, and placed it back in her palm. Elara Voss, will you marry me? Her breath caught. No cameras, no board, no threat map. The lighthouse lamp glowed in the window behind her. Yes, she said, but not because you carried me. I know, not because you stayed 30 days. I know because you learned when to stand beside me, when to challenge me, and when to let me take the step myself. He smiled. That is a very long yes. I had several months. He kissed her before she could improve it further. They married the following spring, in June's backyard beneath a temporary canopy because Seattle weather remained unwilling to participate in symbolism. The guest list was small. Piper wore yellow and carried the rings. Luis handled security with a team that rotated responsibility every hour. Wayfinder monitored the perimeter without turning the day into an operation. Elara walked part of the aisle with her cane and used the chair for the reception because joy was tiring and she no longer confused accommodation with defeat. At the end of the ceremony, Piper handed them the compass instead of a decorative unity candle. Borrowing has a return part, she told the guests. But home means you can keep coming back. June cried openly. Lenora claimed something was in her eye. Mason looked at Elara, and Elara looked at the child between them, and the old fear of departure did not vanish. Fear did not have to vanish. It only had to stop being the sole architect. The story people told afterward was simpler than the life itself. They said no bodyguard survived a month, until a single dad refused to abandon the CEO. That was true. As far as headlines went, Mason crossed the 30th day. He carried her over a sabotage bridge. He stayed when leaving would have been easier to defend. But staying was not one decision made under gunfire. It was 100 quieter decisions before and after. Arriving early when credentials failed, asking who benefited, listening when a child named the wall, building a system that did not require blind trust, returning after late meetings, admitting fear, accepting help, refusing to turn another person into either a burden or a rescue. Elara had spent years believing loyalty was measured by whether someone obeyed every instruction and survived every test. Mason taught her something less controllable. Loyalty was not a person trapped at an assigned post. It was the freedom to see the danger accurately and choose to return anyway. Mason had spent years believing protection meant anticipating every loss before it arrived. Elara taught him that love could not be made safe through perfect vigilance. A home was not a place where nothing bad happened. It was a place where truth could enter without being mistaken for abandonment. And Piper, who had understood the heart of it before either adult, taught them that late was not gone, difficult was not impossible, and several simple things hiding together could still become one clear direction. The original brass compass remained on the peg beside the front door. Its case grew more scratched. The red cord faded. It traveled to courtrooms, school events, hospitals, product launches, and one backyard wedding. It never pointed towards safety in the magical way children sometimes imagined. It only pointed north. That was enough. The direction was not a guarantee. A promise was not a shield. A person could be afraid and still take the next 5 steps. Years later, Wayfinder's training center kept a replica of the compass inside a glass case with a short description of the Bainbridge incident. Mason disliked the display because it made ordinary courage look historical. Elara allowed it because she believed institutions needed objects that carried their mistakes forward. The engraved sentence beneath the replica did not mention her title or his profession. It read, "Protection is not the promise that nothing happens. It is the promise that no one faces it alone." If this story stayed with you, leave a comment about the person who taught you that staying can be stronger than control. On rainy evenings, when the lighthouse lamp came on in the front window and Piper's shoes blocked the hallway, and Elara's cane leaned beside Mason's coat, the real compass remained outside the case, available to anyone leaving, and everyone who borrowed it knew the return part